Good morning on this Saturday morning. Before we get to our study of Matthew today, just a quick note. I'm not planning on doing a Bible study tomorrow on Sunday. We'll take a day of rest and come back to this again on Monday morning. This has been a great week. I hope you have been enjoying this study. Let's pick right up with Matthew chapter 1, and we'll go to verse 17 this morning. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Now, as we take a look at these first 17 verses of Matthew chapter 1, we see that these are all broken down into three categories, and they're summarized in verse 17. From verse 2 through verse 6, we see the period of time from the early patriarch fathers to King David. And then from verse 6 through verse 11, we see from King David's time until the exportation to Babylon, deportation to Babylon, and then from verse 12 down to verse 16, we see the post-exilic time. Now, when we read Matthew, and we haven't talked a lot about the author yet, we'll get to that here eventually, but we must remember whenever we look at a gospel, what is it that the gospel writer is trying to get across? What is it that they're saying? What is their objective? Just like four different witnesses to a car accident might have slightly different versions of what they say, we see the account of Jesus being explained from four different perspectives in the four different Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel of John. Now, when we take a look at the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew wants to present Jesus as the rightful king. And so everything that he talks about gives us this idea of Jesus' right to rule. Mark, on the other hand, shows us Jesus as the exact opposite in some respects, as the servant. Luke shows us Jesus as the Son of Man. And John shows us Jesus as the Son of God. And so consequently, the way they begin their Gospels are all different. John, for example, starts off with a genealogy of sorts in that he explains Jesus, that in the beginning was the Word, and explains Jesus all the way back prior to his human appearance here on earth. Luke gives this genealogy that works backwards from the one in Mark. It starts at Jesus and works its way back to Abraham, and then from Abraham back to Adam. The idea again being that Jesus was actually the Son of Man. Mark, of course, talking about Jesus as a servant, gives no genealogy at all. And Matthew here in chapter 1 is showing Jesus as the rightful sovereign, the rightful king. And so he is giving us this genealogy, showing us many of the people who were in Jesus' royal line, why Jesus should rightfully be king. As we go down through this list, and the list is very long of characters, and we've talked over this past week about some of them, I want to just mention a few more from my own personal study notes this week. Not have time to go through all of them, but just to give you some idea of the richness of the history that is in Matthew's writing. He talks about Aminadab, who was a tribal leader of the family of Judah during the initial wilderness wanderings. His son, Nahshon, was actually the brother-in-law to Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. So these are people who were very much at the forefront of leaders of the Israelites as they were wandering around. Salmon is Nahshon's son. He marries Rahab, who was the prostitute that it gave the information so that the Israelites would understand Jericho. Boaz was a very wealthy landowner, made a brilliant legal move, certainly a great love story to marry Ruth, but Boaz, a brilliant landowner, brilliant legal move to redeem Ruth's mother-in-law's land, Naomi's land. Then we have a fellow by the name of Obed, and not much is written in history about Obed, but his name came to be known as worshiper. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not, but Obed is also the root word for our word obedience. So in other words, if you really want to be a worshiper of God, you must be an obedient son of God. Jesse, the father of 8 sons, was a shepherd, had 2 daughters, and one of those sons, of course, the youngest, was David, who also became a great king. Solomon, David's son, was the first king born in the purple, had a long reign of 40 years, but the last 20 years spent in idolatry. Rehoboam, the only son of Solomon, wouldn't take the advice of some of the elders in his country and increased the taxes, and really, because of that, had the first big split and saw the southern kingdom break away from the northern kingdom. Abijah had a 3-year reign. He attempted to bring back and reunite the countries, and yet ended in a horribly bloody battle. 500,000 people died. Asaph, not the musician, King Asa, had a 10-year reign that was very peaceful and prosperous, had a lot of religious reforms. But in the 39th year of his reign, had a disease of the feet. And the Bible tells us that instead of trusting God, he sought physicians and died as a result. Jehoshaphat means Jehovah judged. He sought the Lord with all of his heart, according to 2 Chronicles 22:9. Now, the reason I go into all these names all week long is that you get the idea that Jesus comes from a long line of royal ancestry. Now, that's not what gives him the right to be king. You and I both know that he is the Son of God and therefore is already in a position of authority. But Matthew here, addressing Jewish Christ followers, is saying, I know that you have been looking for a Messiah. I know that you have been looking for someone that meets the qualification of kingship. And I want you to know that Jesus is that person who has been prophesied, who has been predicted, who we have been promised. It's important for us, even today, even though we may not be Jewish, to understand that Jesus fulfills the Old Testament prophecy of being of royal blood, even though his own father was not Joseph, as we end up finding out here, and we'll talk more about next week. But from a legal standpoint, Matthew was pointing out the legality, the line that led down to Jesus' human father. How about you? As you think about this great story, as we come into this Christmas season and we think of the little baby born in a manger, do you honor him as the gracious king? Do you say, this is not just a baby, but this is King Jesus, to whom I give all of my loyalty and allegiance? I've enjoyed this week, and I'm looking forward to talking with you again next Monday. Have a great weekend.